Can't tell whether to feel good or bad about that introduction. Even though he works for Goldman Sachs, it's true. How's everybody doing? I've never used a microphone before like this. Is this all right? Usually I'm on stage like this, and you guys are jumping around and stuff like that. So feel free. All right, I'm going to read a bit. So my name's Jihan. I began my career as a trader about 10 years ago at Goldman Sachs here in London, knowing next to nothing about the markets or about what I was getting myself into. Most of the ideas I had about what it was, it wasn't. I began my career as a spoken word and hip-hop artist about 6 or 7 years after that, thinking that I knew a lot about what it was about from being a fan, but never actually having done it, myself. Needless to say, it's been a pretty unusual journey walking these two paths, which couldn't really be much more different, and for a while I had trouble reconciling them both within myself, until I eventually learned for myself that you don't always have to choose the left or the right road. Sometimes you can choose both. So today I'm going to talk about the most basic rules of trading, the building blocks, and how applicable I've found them for life on the whole, why I think they're analogous and maybe applicable to some of you that hopefully aren't in finance. Because what you're trading, what you're actually learning to trade is your own fears, hopes, and biases. And actually, I would argue, figuring out the economics or the mathematics behind the market is, relatively speaking, the easy part. The reason why I think it's such a useful analogy, besides just the fact that it's what I do, is the following. While most of life's big lessons, I think, are kind of painted in various shades of gray, trading is obviously acutely measurable. Its results are unbiased by what we hope or wish the outcome to be, and also by who we'd like to think that we are. At the end of the day, you always know if you've won or lost, and usually, in my experience, you can trace the genesis of that outcome to something with your own character, which I find interesting. The kinds of questions that trading poses are things like, do you crack under pressure? Do you let your ego interfere with your objectives? Do you get wedded to your beliefs and have an inability to be flexible and change your mind when the facts change? Are you afraid of failing or perhaps succeeding? In life, I think these are some of the most important questions, but they're so abstract and so broad that it's hard to get a real handle on them. Instead, most of us just develop a self-view based on what we think we are, who we think we are, and who we're told we are by other people, but we never have an actual measurable way to know whether the kinds of decisions that we're making are actually maximizing our potential. So this kind of introspective nature, this kind of self-reflection is pretty much the one true common denominator I've found amongst the great traders that I've seen and worked with. There's no real correlation I've found between sex, race, age, and I would argue even intellect, frankly, in terms of what makes someone a really great trader. The market is unflinching. You can't cajole it, you can't convince it, you can't tempt or seduce it, you can't plead with it. It just simply reflects what you put back. And you find out the hard way that you can't really profit by lying to yourself. The only way you can really win is to be honest about what's happening in the world, and also honest about what's happening with yourself, about who you are, and importantly about who you're not. So I'm going to talk about a couple of the high-level key rules of trading, as I found them, the building blocks, and why I think they might be interesting for you. The first one is to know your edge. As we heard, actually, the best traders, measured by the percentage of days they're up versus down, is usually no more than 60 or 65% of the time. Whereas a roulette wheel, a monkey throwing darts at a board, or flipping a coin could presumably, be right at least 50% of the time. So what's all the fuss about, frankly? But then how do we explain the fact that there are some traders and some funds who've gone 10, 20, 30 years producing incredibly outsized returns, sometimes never having had a down year? Does it really all boil down to chance and the fact that somebody has to win, or is there something else? My view is that the answer is no, there is something else, but it's what I think it is that's interesting. So from what I've seen, there's no real universal trading strategy that works, but one of the things that great traders have in common, like we heard, is that the wins are much bigger than the losses. Said another way, people seem to be betting much bigger when they're winning than when they're losing. Great traders, that is. So
success isn't really all just about the frequency of how often you can win. It's really about the magnitude with which you can win. And to affect this, it's all about having the conviction and the belief to bet big, because you can't win big without betting big, obviously. The real differentiator I've found between the good and the great traders is the great traders are able to spot those particular moments in their life when they have what's called edge. It takes a certain bravery to know when the odds are particularly tipped in your scale and to be able to have the conviction to bet big enough to capitalize on that. So when you believe you're onto something great, whether it's a trade or an idea or maybe a relationship, whatever, if you're only willing to risk the same amount as when you're onto something which is just good, then you're never really going to maximize your gains, because as we've seen, simply being consistent isn't really enough to produce the kind of outsized returns that the great traders have had. You know, it attracts a lot of smart people, motivated people, etc., all dedicated, predicting what's going to happen next. Many of them have very complicated computer models, and yet still the hit rates can't really transcend what seems to be this upper bound. But by being tuned into those opportune moments, when you believe you actually have the edge and betting much bigger, you know, you can produce returns that are much, much greater. Rule number 2 is buying low, selling high. The reason I would argue that even most traders only get it right 50 or 55% of the time, despite being smart, hardworking, and all the rest of it, is that they're human. And when you're trading, or when you're living, it's very difficult not to get enticed by human emotions to do the wrong thing at the wrong time. To succeed in trading, you really have to train yourself to behave in a way which is frankly unnatural. If you think about simple supply and demand, it tells you that when there are more buyers than sellers, the price rises. When there are more sellers than buyers, the price falls. Simple, right? But said another way, and extrapolating a bit, what that really means is that when there's a majority opinion about something, whether that opinion's right or wrong, the market moves based on what the majority feels is going to happen. So trading is really one of the true democracies in this way. So therefore, in order to implement this simple strategy of buying low, you have to, by definition, be able to buy when the majority is selling. Otherwise, the price wouldn't be low. Said another way, you have to be able to listen to your own heart and mind and have the conviction to stand against popular opinion, the mob or the herd, in order to resist the temptation of what they're doing and really back your own beliefs, which, as we all know from lots of different examples, this is not easy. So let's look at what not to do. Imagine you're a trader in the market or anything else you're doing, and you're investing something. In the markets, it's money, but it might be time, emotion, and relationship, whatever. Now, imagine that what you've bought begins to fall in value. This produces a very obvious reaction: fear or pain. Depending on what your trigger points are, you might start second-guessing yourself. Maybe you should have stayed up later and studied. Maybe you should have researched it. Maybe you should have listened to your friend that told you, the opposite was probably going to happen. Either way, this fear is heightened by what's at risk. In trading, it's the fear of losing money, but the wider analogy is clear. When we feel fear, human nature always tells us to do the same thing, which is make the fear stop. The problem in trading is that it's very easy to make the fear stop. All you have to do is sell your position. All you have to do is cut. So what you find happening is that you've bought something, you've invested your time or your money or your energy in something you thought was going to increase in value. The minute it begins to wobble, you begin to feel that fear, that self-doubt, and you sell, violating the very principle that you're trying to incorporate, which is to buy low, sell high. You've now bought high, sold low. You've locked in a loss. No trade, really, in life or the markets goes up in a straight line. The truly great traders are the ones that have the strength of character to stick to their guns and see out those inevitable moments of adversity in pursuit of the higher goals and the dreams, which is a lesson I think worth reminding. The third final rule of trading is the most important in my opinion, which is finding your own voice. And that's what I found myself looking for at Goldman, finding my own voice. You see, because it's always a choice, but freedom is a heavy burden. I mean, freedom is a heavy word, bruh. So I wrote it all down trying to give voice to the me within. I highly recommend it. I got intimate with dead endings and other mirages like forks in the road when there's no one that tells you which way to go home. And nobody ever told you you could choose both. So while I was warming up for the shows, I was also trading dollar yen backstage on the phone with Tokyo, going for both. Was kind of afraid of being a cliche, though. There was only a couple of us on the trading floor, and truth told, did the only black trader really have to be a rapper? I mean, it did seem kind of predictable. But it was my voice that came out. It said, be yourself. I said, all right, no doubt. So at the same time that consumers were blaming banks for the negative equity in their home mortgages, and the press was scapegoating traders for their new Porsches, while Wall Street was arguing back that those borrowers could have chosen to live within their means, telling them nobody forced you, I was navigating the daily fluctuations of the nation's bourses with a lyric pad beneath my research report. War going on, and I was deep in the fort. I didn't lie to them, just kept the truth to myself. I saw all around me proof that the wealth wasn't enough. So I went looking for the missing ingredient. I should have known it wasn't out there. It only seems it is. So I was looking out my office window thinking to myself, I have to see this. So there I was working right in the thick. Woke up one morning after a show, walked into the office and told them I quit. And then I was like, shit. Did I really just do that? I thought, yeah, I must have, because they started offering me incentives to stay. You see, that was the custom. But I was like, man, I should have just thought of this earlier. But the cat was already out of the bag. I mean, this cat was out. I'd already packed my bags, you see, flip-flops and sunglasses, threw them in my rucksack, put it over my shoulder, the same place of the boat of the Atlas laughed at. Took my bonus check, cashed that, and flew to the city of angels, where I composed and arranged flows, learned the composition of the buttons and new nodes that were needed to navigate. So I began to cohabitate in the habitat of magic acts and savage cats that could take your lunch money but might just have a little trouble counting the change, you know what I'm saying? Which, to be brutally honest, there wasn't a lot of, just a creation of the product. So I scripted my 2 cents worth and donated them to the piggy bank of the genre. See, I wanted to develop a new theorem. I wanted to speak that truth serum that removed the beeswax so I could submit honey to the eardrum when you see the fear run to it flow. You know? Guess I'm just a lifeaholic. A lifelong attendee of Ataraxia Anonymous, in love with the belief is the first step towards dream chasing. And if I went all in, I figured I might just make it. And even if I didn't, it wouldn't really make no difference, long as I was being me when I did it. And, you know, that's the funny thing about the market. It's what people don't understand, and why I think it doesn't make sense to ask for stock tips or, you know, read the papers for hot ideas. The real value isn't really in any individual trade. It's really only in the consistent and honest implementation of your own personal methodology. You know, one of the most interesting, I'll end on this, one of the most interesting and encouraging lessons I learned working on the floor, still there actually, is that there's no one way to do the job. Everyone's different. And the only clear pattern in trading behavior is this. If you're trying to trade in a way which isn't consistent with your own self, you're going to lose. You know, my time on the trading floor helped to prove something to me that, frankly, I'd kind of hoped was true going in, that we all have a natural walk and an authentic voice, that we have to find it by ourselves and for ourselves, and that when we speak from it, anything's possible. Thanks.